All right, so let's talk about some significant things about once the word spreads. Because just because of two things, there are tens of thousands of people that know me or either know my father. My father worked his entire life as he did his previous life, one of his previous lifetimes when he was the father of Jesus Christ. Obviously, this time he did not have a Jewish wife, and I do not have part Jewish ethnicity. So he worked his entire life in Maine, mostly out of Portland, but all over the place, doing carpentry work. There are many $1 million, multi-millionaires in Maine that he did install their kitchens, bathrooms, oak flooring. He's built multiple houses from scratch. Did everything on to build those houses other than pouring the concrete basement. He's done some concrete work, chimneys, electrical work, plumbing. Like the home he lives in now that's worth, $800,000. He did everything in that home himself. Tile, roofing, fucking having a big I-beam installed in the garage, everything other than pouring the concrete basement. But as far as working, he had his first company was called Knock on Woodworks. Then he worked for Paul White Tile for many years. Kitchens Incorporated, uh, Hancock Lumber. I mean, he's built a home in Mexico. His second wife. He divorced my mother. This is why I had a lot of hardships in my life because my father has not helped me with virtually anything I've ever wanted. Neither me or my brother, anything that we've seriously wanted to do. And he doesn't believe anything I've ever told him about who I feel I am. I've talked he left my mother when I was 7 or 8 years old after we moved out in the country. My mother worked for minimum wage for the company LL Beans. I've wrote extensively about this on my Facebook. But between the people that know him and the job that he's done, I'm talking about thousands and thousands of people know him, and all these people that have had any visitors or Christmas parties at their home. I mean, they remember my father. My father's the best goddamn carpenter in the state of Maine. Period. Like that, I'm telling you that because that was his number one concern. That was the complaint of both of his wives, my mother and his current wife, that he cared more about any customer. He talked nicer to any customer that ever called him on the phone than he ever treated any of his family members. I mean, this guy, not only did he work for companies and do a lot of his own, I mean, he was grandfathered in. He'd been doing it for so long. He has no certifications as a contractor. He's grandfathered in. Like, he knows how to do it all, right? So the thing about him is that anytime any customer, I mean, you give him his contact information direct. Anytime, he installed a lot of granite countertops and, very expensive, the highest quality, Korean work or stuff you would have done in a bathroom. Like, he was the guy for that company. If they had a big project that needed to be done right, that could cost $100,000 for a kitchen or something. Like, he was the guy that did it for many, many years. I'm talking about hundreds of homes. So just from those people's homes, I mean, they remember my dad. I guarantee you. And from all the connections that they have of people that they could talk to, be like, yeah, this guy's dad installed my kitchen. People have been to their homes. He's done massive. I mean, the most expensive cabinets you could buy. Cabinets that cost several $1,000s each that were antique made and all sorts of like woodworks, Canadian woodworks or something. Is one of them. I forget. Done all of it. He's recently retired, but he maintains a couple of properties. And he's been down to Mexico. He goes down to Mexico for a trip for 3 or 4 months each year into Rancho Nuevo, Mexico, which is about 8-hour drive from the border south into Mexico. He built a church down there for helped build a church down there, Seventh-day Adventist Church, many years ago. But between that, what my father has done in his current lifetime, and the time I spent 3 years as a recruiter in Vermont, where I had my own offices, and this is also very significant. I had my own office, and we had a group of 3 or 4 Navy recruiters responsible for the state, and we had 3 Navy recruiting offices. So I lived in Barre, Vermont, Barre, Vermont, and our central office was there, where we would meet in the morning, pick up my government vehicle. But I spent a couple years of that. I would pick up my government vehicle there, and then I'd drive north to the Williston office, every single morning, and that was my office. During the time, it was located across the Majestic 10. It was located in the first floor by Quiznos there. And the time that I was a Navy recruiter would have been the last 6 months of George Bush's presidency, or the last 2.5 years of George Bush's presidency, leading into Obama's. So during my recruiting tour there, I got to see the voting that year, and Obama elected, and first state on the electoral map that night that had their votes in was Vermont for Obama. And so that was a very serious time. All the stuff going on in the Middle East was in full swing. I would have, we were working like 80 hours a week, at least, every single week. I mean, I put over, close to 200,000 miles on government vehicles, just drive all over the goddamn place. Half my recruits that I ever recruited lived on dirt roads. We were I remember filling out logs, because we had a credit card for our Govy, and we had to record the mileage each month. There were months that I put over 12,000 miles on my government vehicle in a single month. And we were driving all of our recruits from Vermont to Portland, Maine. Just me and my recruits. So all the guys that I handled and dealt with and tried to recruit, maybe they went to boot camp, maybe they didn't. I had a significant number of people that I lost during the delayed entry program, because when you sign a contract to go, you're usually in the delayed entry program for approximately 9-10 months. That's on average. I had a few guys that shipped fast out of, however many. I probably handled total paperwork going through the whole recruiting process of, 2, 3, 4 hour interview, bringing them to Portland, Maine for them to take the test, going through the whole physical, signing contract, and then handling them. I probably had approximately 100 guys, although I probably only had maybe 50 or 60 that actually went to boot camp that I recruited during those 3 years. However, during those 3 years, they had recently put in a program across the entire United States where they're going to take a retired guy from one of the this is for the Navy. They're going to take a retired guy from one of the special forces units in the Navy, and they're going to make him a mentor for certain regions of the United States. And New England was one region in its entirety. And the guy that was a retired SEAL, he lived in Burlington, Vermont. I was the closest recruiting office to him. So he used my office many times, would come in because he wanted to talk to a specific guy that was in that area that was interested. Usually those guys would have been people that I recruited, or maybe someone was up there visiting him. He used my office several times, and I spent many times in the pool with that guy, just listening to the stuff he said, going to events where people would meet. Our main event, he would do 2 events. He had it set up so well for everyone he handled everyone in New England very well. If you talk to anyone that went into rescue swimming, SEAL, explosive ordnance disposal, Navy diver, or special warfare combatant crewman, during the time that Bill Atkinson was a mentor in New England, if you talk to any of those guys in New England that ever got to spend any time with William Atkinson, they would tell you, they would guarantee you that man treated them very, very well. Now, depending on what happened after they went to boot camp and went through the program, that could be a completely different story. But I've got to live close to that man and do some, special stuff. He'd call me on like a weekend. He'd be like, hey, I'm going to the YMCA. If you got any guys in Burlington, if you got any guys that want to go here, meet me on the weekend. We can go jog down to the lake, go swimming in the lake. Got to do that with him, a couple of things, and some very other unique opportunities. But that man was very important that I spent those 3 years during that time in the most liberal state of the United States. And during those 3 years, I learned everything I needed to learn about how people tick, what motivates them, what they care about. When you spend 3 hours interviewing someone and then another 3 hours driving to Portland, Maine, and then the next day being on deck is what they call it while they sign their contract. 3 hours, just me and that guy, driving back to bring them home. There's one guy I drove back from where he wanted to go home. That's my responsibility after he joins. I drove him all the way to New York after I brought him to Portland, Maine. It was like an 8-hour drive. I got home at like 4 a.m. in the morning by the time I got home, right? And that I read about that guy, Shane DeRizio, on my Facebook. He's a very significant person. Unfortunately, and Bill Atkins would remember that person specifically. But I've written about him on my Facebook. He's a very significant person, I'm telling you, eternally. But I had to go through those experiences, during that time, and I had to have that man live close to me. And all of those things lined up. And I had some very difficult situations that I went through as far as who I worked for and what they were telling me to do during that recruiting period. And I'm telling you right now, I worked for some of the dirtiest, most rotten leaders I've ever met in my fucking life. Micromanaging me over my cell phone every time I got done having an interview with someone. Then I'd spend the next 8, 9 months, 10 months before they went to boot camp. And I had a lot of guys that, because I was forced to lie to them in one way or another, or change plans, or tell them one thing, and then the next day I have to tell them something else. Because every time someone left my office after an interview, or whatever we'd made plans, my boss wasn't okay with those plans. I always had to fucking call him back up, tell him something else. So that shit went on for, the whole fucking 3 years I was there. But a lot of people know me. I mean, I went to a lot of schools, a lot of places just by myself where I had to represent the Navy. And I tried the best I could at that job. But between my father and my 3 years spent in Vermont, in New England, tens of thousands of people know me. They know that this guy's Warren Finnegan's son, or they met me on recruiting duty. And, growing up, all my friends, family, I went to 3 different high schools when I was in high school. Tens of thousands of people know me between Vermont and Maine. No one's talking about me yet, but once they start, people are going to start listening to me. Despite any country they're in, or any leader they're in, or any title or fucking position, There's 2 types of authority, well, there's 5 types of authoritative structures. 2 are positional authority based on title, fucking figurehead, or, Antifa, Nazi, fucking, call themselves anti-fascist while they're spreading fascism. Fucking ridiculous. Anyways, there's 2 types of positional, or authoritative structures. Positional authority, 2 main ones, and delegated authority, right? The person best for the job in that company or whatever is recognized to do the work. And they get it done. So, delegated authority, because I'm delegated by, an authority. And if you don't like it, too fucking bad. Once people start talking about it, and believe me, they will. Because when I get starting to talk about what they did to me, the pharmaceutical industry, once they get a hold of me, started making paperwork on me, and then when anyone comes to see you, police officer or whatever, they have complete fucking access to anything you've been hospitalized before. The shit they did to me. I mean, if God gets birthed down here and his direct soul has the experience getting placed on drugs to control his mind, when I say this is the last fucking goddamn time, he decides to have a manifestation of himself, born down here, I'm being completely fucking serious. Once I tell you the stories that they did to me, which probably won't occur until I start interviewing someone, but they did some fucked up shit to me. So fucked up that it would take me hours to explain, but the shit they did to me, I mean, God's never gonna go through it again. No fucking way.